This episode is brought to you by On Your Mark, a college success program for neurodivergent students at Marquette University. Call 414-288-0203.
Don't always go running over there with the backpack when they've forgotten it. Work with them on systems that work for them. Because again, you're not going to be able to submit the paper for them that they forgot to submit online at midnight, when they're in that dorm.
What should parents and educators do to help their neurodivergent teens prepare for the transition to college? And what are the skills that they need most to succeed? Today's guest is the author of 7 Steps, High School to College Transition Strategies for Students with Disabilities. Elizabeth Hamblet is the founder of LD Advisory, and she shares her ideas on how we can help our kids successfully launch into secondary education. That's straight ahead on episode 163. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity? You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity Podcast.
Just a quick shout out to everyone who's a member in our Facebook group, the Neurodiversity Podcast Advocacy and Support Group. I am loving all of your ideas and feedback and questions. Just a quick reminder that the members of our Facebook group are able to submit questions for our quarterly Ask Me Anything episodes. We're prepping a new AMA for April, and I'll be answering your questions all about autism to align with our upcoming Autism Acceptance Month series. If you have questions about autism that I can answer, be sure to join our group and submit your question. Okay, my conversation with Elizabeth Hamblet is up next.
Hey guys, as this podcast grows, we've been working on new ways to increase awareness about neurodiversity through education. So we've launched a new platform called the Neurodiversity University. It's an online portal where anyone who wants to can go to learn more about the neurodivergent people in your life. If you're a parent, there are tools to help them grow. If you're a teacher, there are courses about how to identify and educate them. And we're working on more new courses, videos, and tools every day. So school districts, check out our continuing education courses on dyslexia and twice exceptionality. Parents, check out a free course on using fandom and AI to help your kids with coping skills. Or if your child has anxiety, fears, phobias, or OCD-related problems, we have a program for you called SPACE. Our goal is to teach the world about the ability of neurodivergent people to contribute and innovate, and to help teachers, parents, and others prepare them to meet those challenges head-on. So go to neurodiversity.university or look for a link in the show notes.
This is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Today we're talking with Elizabeth Hamblet. Elizabeth is the founder of LD Advisory and author of the newly revised 7 Steps for College Success, a pathway for students with disabilities. So Elizabeth, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back. I'm delighted to be here.
We're going to talk about the transition to college, but really I think this is an important conversation that probably all parents need to hear. I think we can go ahead and start, though, with that jump from high school to college because it's so intimidating for everyone. We all want our kids to be successful, but when we have to let them go and allow that independence, it can be really hard for parents, like especially if we've had that comfort of like an IEP or a 504 in our back pocket. What are some of the biggest concerns that you notice when you're talking to adults who are helping to guide kids, teens, young adults through this process?
There are lots of concerns. And to be honest, sometimes when people read my work or they see my presentations, they'll say to me, well, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about really applies to the general population. And I think that that's so true. And so more parents of college-bound high school students should be concerned about how they're going to do there because, it is a big leap for everybody. And I say that not to diminish the concerns of parents of students with disabilities, but to kind of let them know that everybody's feeling that way, even if they're not talking about it. So, the biggest concern, obviously, is for how they are going to manage the demands. It's like the perfect storm of a lot of freedom, lack of supervision, and frankly, a lot of demands on them. And so adjusting to living someplace new with a roommate, again, is a concern that everybody has. And, it'd be interesting. There's no way to measure this, but whether the amount of concern any parent has about that is like in some proportion to how much support they know they've been giving their student over, the high school years. And, I think one of the best things to do is to start making your students, really more independent every year that they move through high school. Give them more and more responsibilities. They will be without supervision. So they're going to have to get up in the morning without anybody to help them. They are going to have to resist the urge to, go hang out with friends and get their work done. And they'll be more confident about their ability to do that. And parents will be too. I think if they have allowed them to do that, stopped supervising them so much, and, let them make some choices as they move through high school to see how they spend their time.
One of the things that I often really preach about is self-advocacy, which I think is important. But really, I feel like self-advocacy is maybe even kind of a sub-skill of just being able to be independent. And that's what I really hear you talking about, is building independence in kids so that they're ready to take all of that on their own.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to circle back to your question. You started with they have the comfort of the IEP or the 504 plan. Mm-hmm. To be very clear, colleges do provide accommodations, and they provide accommodations across academics, across housing, across any service that they provide. Section 504 is, really the relevant law. ADA is part of it as well, but most of the guidance comes from Section 504, but Subpart E, which specifically addresses post-secondary and is very different from Subpart D, which covers K through 12. So we do provide accommodations, but there are a lot of services that we don't provide. And there are a lot of supports that students may be accustomed to. There's really not a lot of direct adult assistance with assignments. My colleagues, I think more often for a student who has a reading or print-based disorder, are having students, tests read to students through the use of technology rather than human readers. There are not really accommodations where a member of staff will interpret test questions for students. There's a lot of misunderstanding. Some people do know that IEPs aren't valid after high school because IDEA doesn't even cover colleges. Mm-hmm. And so there's nothing in the wording of IDEA that says when your kid graduates or ages out of the system, their IEP no longer applies, but it just doesn't. They're not enforceable, if you will, at the college level. But the same is true for 504 plans. There are no 504 plans at the college level. There might be some colleges I've seen call the letter or the notification they send to professors about students' approved accommodations 504 plans, but they're not plans. And so to go back to that independence theme, what's important about that is we don't case manage students at the college level. We are not checking disability services, and I'll abbreviate that to DS for the rest of this conversation. And our offices have lots of different names, as you might imagine, like the Office for Access or Accessibility and Equity. But where I work, it's called DS. And we don't check in with students weekly. If they want to make an appointment with us, perhaps there's enough staffing to do that. We don't look at their grades. We don't email their professors and find out if they're going to class. And that is where, as you said, the independence happens, and the self-advocacy piece that you're talking about. If students aren't doing well, professors aren't necessarily going to say, hey, come and see me after class. They should go to office hours. They should email and ask questions, set themselves up for tutoring, whatever they need.
I think it's a really hard conversation, but it does need to happen.
Yeah.
Because we have to figure out what is the appropriate amount of support that we're providing to students. And this is where, leading up to that transition, I'm a huge advocate for accommodations. But it's kind of this need to find the balance between, what accommodations we are providing and what the kids need. I think some of that really even just starts at a really young age.
What concerns me the most, or what interests me, I should say, is students' sense of self-efficacy and their confidence going from high school to college. Again, for all students, college is a leap. It's meant to be. One of my favorite quotes from the book, and actually it was my friend who's a gap experience expert, and he was talking about gap experiences and how to pick the right one. And he said, well, the experience should stretch, not stress you. And I think that that's true for college too, but it is expected to be a stretch. And so, I'm a big fan of books like The Gift of Failure and The Self-Driven Child, which talk about, letting students do what they are prepared to do and seeing, getting the results. Because students, if they are constantly being bolstered by accommodations or modifications or being rescued, I am worried will go to college knowing how much support they've had and worried about their ability to do without those supports.
Do you have any advice for how parents or educators can know when the help that they're offering is too much help?
Yeah.
How do you balance that?
I think it's hard. And I think what the challenge is, as I said earlier, or alluded to it, the goals of IDEA are really, about success, about helping students achieve success, meet the district's or the state's educational benchmarks, things like that. And at the college level, the expression that we use all the time is we're there to provide access. And even in the wording of the law, it says that accommodations are meant to give students an equal opportunity, but it's not to guarantee them that success. And so I refer to this because I think sometimes, I hear stories from colleagues and even from parents themselves about what adjustments are being made for students. And so some of those are just, as I said, things that they're not going to have access to, like the ability to retake a test for a better grade. And so look, I'm a parent. I have young adults myself. I know what it's like to want your kids to do as well as they can. But I think to start to withdraw some of the adult direction and supervision, I keep saying. So I have colleagues, who are college consultants who say that they work with students who are so busy because they're getting tutored every day after school. And when it is set up to the point that the student never has to ask for the help, it's just always there, they know somebody's going to show up every Thursday and work on something with them. I'm not saying to withdraw that. If that's what the student needs to get through their high school experience, that's fine. But I think talking to the tutors or the executive functioning coaches or the ADHD coaches about who is organizing that meeting, how are the tutors and professionals helping your student to organize themselves? They, certainly by senior year, the student should be the one saying, okay, you're coming Thursday. Here's what I have to work on. Here are the questions that I have. Prepare for the meetings, and not just sit at a table with, whoever the professional is and say, well, what do I do now? Just Leahy talks about this in Gift of Failure. Don't always go running over there with the backpack when they've forgotten it. Work with them on systems that work for them. Because again, you're not going to be able to submit the paper for them that they forgot to submit online at midnight, when they're in that dorm.
Are there some types of accommodations or requests? Like you mentioned, not being able to retake tests. And so maybe that's one that a lot of kids have when they're in middle school or high school or whatever. That's not realistic to have when they're at the college level. Mm-hmm. Are there some other examples of that, like of what's unrealistic and perhaps maybe what is a more realistic kind of expectation that might align with that? Like if it's not this, then maybe this is a better option.
So one of the things that people I think are most shocked about when they read my work or hear me speak is that extensions, deadline extensions or more time to write papers outside of class is not a very commonly approved accommodation. And that, again, this is all to me about your students' confidence and self-efficacy. And so while they're in high school, they should get some assistance in, getting prepared to break down assignments into, chunks and meet those interim deadlines. And, the thing is, I would assume in some high schools, teachers are asking for a first draft, a revised draft, whatever. Professors often don't want to see anything but the final product. So if the teacher themselves are making those deadlines, making sure the student meets them, because all the self-awareness piece, right, and the scheduling and the time management piece comes from saying, all right, I have to have 5 pages by next Friday. How long is it going to take me? And what kinds of, I hate to say it, but sacrifices might I have to make in my schedule to make sure that I meet this deadline? Because that's going to be what they have to do at the college level. There are online, one of the favorite tools one of my colleagues ever showed me is they're called assignment calculators. Mm-hmm. University libraries seem to be the ones that host these, as I've discovered. And there are all sorts of iterations of these outside. Folks can just do a search for University Assignment Calculator. My favorite one is from the University of Toronto. And you say when you're going to start the paper and when the paper is due. And you can even say it's a research paper, it's a lab report. And you click the button and it gives you a breakdown of deadlines to meet. And again, that is the first step, is the breakdown, right? Mm-hmm. But then meeting those is the most important part. Some of our students need longer to write their papers, but what it's going to mean at the college level is starting those papers sooner. Nobody's going to tell them. They're going to have to figure it out on their own. So the more practice they have and the more that they understand that that's how their process is, I think the better they'll be set up for success.
I love that idea of the assignment calculator. I think,
isn't it cool?
As an adult, like with the writing that I've done and the presentations that I do, like I've kind of got it down to a science. Like I know how long it's going to take me to write X number of words or whatever it is. But it's hard to kind of figure that out, like especially for neurodivergent kids who maybe don't have the best awareness of time.
Sure.
One thing that I often hear as a difficulty that either my clients or their parents will talk about, they just can't manage their time. They can't estimate their time. And I'm like, well, that definitely is a skill that can be learned. It can be difficult, but you have to do some data collection.
Exactly.
You have to know how long certain things take you. So even if getting ready in the morning takes you longer than it takes most other people, if you know how long it takes for you, you can then plan around that.
Right.
And even if there's a lot of variation there, it's like, okay, well, some days it takes me only this amount of time. Some days it takes me that amount of time. But still, you kind of have a window there. And so the same as doing assignments or writing papers or whatever it might be. But you've got to be able to chunk that time, which some people can do very naturally.
Absolutely, yeah.
And other kids, don't. But it is so important, especially when you've got multiple classes that have things due at various times, and you just have to be able to manage that.
Right. Preparing for exams, that are going to be on the same day. And, certainly I'm aware of schools that will, as an accommodation, say, okay, no more than 2 exams a day, but not necessarily 1 exam a day, or spreading your exams out so that you have a day to study in between. They have to learn how to, and when I say they have to learn how to juggle, this is not a moralistic thing I'm saying like you should. I am telling you the practicality of this is what I see in the community. Clearly, look, there are more than 4,000 2- and 4-year colleges in the country, and I do not know what happens at any. You'd think me a fool, and I would be if I thought so, but if I said that I knew everything. But I think it's not common for those kinds of things to happen. So it's the juggling, and I am very empathetic to parents, who watch their kids work very, very hard. This is what college is about. It is about working hard, and it is about figuring out your time. And, there's some neat things now for students who have trouble sitting down and getting to work. Body doubling is this idea, that's catching on, where you can do it in person if you can find a classmate who will sit like at the carrel next to you in the library. You guys meet at the library, so there's accountability. You set an amount of time you're both going to work, and you sort of encourage each other. Or you Zoom with a family member, and mom and dad, work on something while you do your paper. it's going to be hard to find somebody perhaps at 2 a.m, when the paper's due at 11. And that's again why I know especially with ADHD, getting that brain fired up is so hard until you are in, that panic mode.
Crisis.
Crisis mode. But the reality is it's just not a common accommodation. And so if they may just have to know that they're going to stay up all night and write that paper.
More in a minute.
On Your Mark is a program that's making attending Marquette University easier for neurodivergent students. On Your Mark is a college success program designed to help neurodivergent students navigate Marquette. They work to build an individual support team and structure that neurodivergent students need to thrive in college. Everyone on that team receives training on best practices for working with neurodivergent students, and then the team assigned to the student helps them build academic, social, and independent living skills by offering one-on-one coaching, peer mentors, weekly seminars, tutoring, and mental health services. The focus is on communication and interviewing skills, relationship development, time management, self-care, stress reduction, and more. So, as you help plan your students' education future, remember the On Your Mark program for students enrolled at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Learn more at marquette.edu/on-your-MARQ, or just look for a link in the show notes. You mentioned the body doubling, which I think is a great tool and is probably something that a lot of people actually use and don't even realize that they're using it.
Right.
I know for me, it's like if I have to clean the house, it's much easier if I know that Dave is also there helping, even if we're in separate rooms, but it's like, okay, I'm not, doing this on my own. But one app that I have found actually that a lot of my clients are really enjoying is called Forest.
Yes.
It's like a time management thing. Have you seen this app?
I know about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So for people who don't know what it is, basically every time you want to stay off of other apps on your phone, you plant a tree and you set a timer for how long you're going to stay off of your phone. And when that timer goes off, if you have not gone away from that screen or closed that app or whatever to go to something else, then your tree has, fully grown and you can make a forest. But there's also a function on this app where you can connect with your peers and you have accountability to your peers. So like if you then don't use that time, it impacts everybody's tree growth. And so it's just kind of this fun little way to manage it. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that it made me think of when you were talking about activation and kind of that panic mode is that sometimes we can give ourselves a false sense of panic, like intentionally. Mm-hmm. So for example, I'm going to write X number of words on this paper within the next 40 minutes and kind of race myself. When I've written my books, I have a spreadsheet where I can track exactly how many words. It's always like a race. Like, can I beat myself? I
love that.
It gives me a very finite goal that I can try to work towards. And that's been helpful to just kind of get some of that motivation. But it's hard. It's hard when executive functioning is an area of weakness to make all those things happen.
And I just had an email from a parent who was surprised that the college does not offer executive functioning help, academic coaching.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to sound like a wet blanket. I think that, I do work with lots of very successful, college students with disabilities. I have over many years. A lot of them are coming to college and they are doing well. They're figuring out what they need. But I do think too, when it comes to things like modifications, again, there are just things that students need to get used to doing. And in fact, the research shows that certainly when it comes to educational settings, being in the general ed classroom is more of a predictor of going to college and doing well there. And it doesn't, the problem with accommodation research is that it's just too hard to tease out whether they make a difference in students' success or not, because I can immediately, show me a study, start to explain the things that the study can't show us, right? So if we look at extended time for tests, and there have been some interesting studies where they've actually looked at, it's been post hoc. So after students have taken tests, you were talking about measuring how much time things take. Mm-hmm. They looked at how much time students were approved for and how much time they actually used. And in this huge sample in one of the studies, 35% of the students approved for extended time didn't use any. And 85% of them used 1.5% time. And so, does that mean, that if they didn't utilize the time they had, they did well, or they didn't need it, or they, all of those things? So what I worry about sometimes, and some researchers have written about this, is there's such an emphasis on getting students accommodations without it seemingly as much time and effort put into teaching them strategies that will help them be successful. So the extended time for tests, having the test read to you by text-to-speech to accommodate print or reading disability, if you haven't learned the material and you haven't spent enough time studying, the time is probably not going to be that helpful. It might give you a little more time to pull things out of your memory. But if you haven't done the readings, it's just not going to be effective. Note-taking is something that a lot of folks ask for. And I can't remember, I'm sorry, I can get you that statistic from this big longitudinal study about what percentage of students received it. But even if you get copies of notes from a note-taker, remember that note-taker might know a lot about that subject and not take as many notes as the student would. And so many of our offices say, look, we'll provide you with copies of a peer's note-taker, but we expect you to take your own notes. And in some cases, students haven't ever had to do that. And in some cases, it's actually just built into the high school's way of doing things. Students get a list of guided notes, a set of guided notes, So just make sure that whoever is working with your student is not only taking care of the accommodations, but, pinpointing where they need to work on some skills that they can utilize independently, because they will still need those even with the accommodations typically.
Yeah, I really like how you talk about the fact that accommodations are useful, but maybe the way to view them is that they're the scaffold around which we build the strategies. And so then as the strategies are being built, we don't need those accommodations quite so much. I have a client who I've worked with, and during the pandemic, he was in high school and he moved to all online school. And let's be honest, this was also something that was happening when he was younger as well. He had a really hard time getting work turned in. It was really difficult for him. And so then, especially when he moved to online school where there were just no deadlines, talk about extended time, the last 2.5 to 3 weeks of the semester was panic, chaos, and crisis, and trying to get everything done because it had all been pushed off to the end. So when he then transitioned to college, we were sitting there at the very beginning of his first semester and looking at some of his syllabi and trying to figure out what was going on. And in one of these expectations, it was like, there's no late work. And he was going to have to get things turned in. Basically, I think the way it was structured was it had to be turned in before the next test or something like that. And he kind of flipped out. He's like, this is not, I can't do this. I need extra time. I need blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, if you think about it, maybe instead of just one giant crisis at the end of the semester, you'll have a lot of smaller crises. He goes, yeah, but I'm used to having the giant crisis. He's neurodivergent, so he's autistic and ADHD. So that change was hard. But I will tell you that it has been better for him. He has managed it. He has risen to the challenge. And so I think sometimes when we offer these things, we really have to think about, at younger ages, and I don't know how this applies necessarily at the college, but I like to talk about negotiable deadlines as opposed to just blanket extended time. And so then depending on the task, you go and talk to your teacher and you say, because of this, I need an extra day or whatever. And again, that kind of builds in some of the self-advocacy. But anytime we're trying to just have an accommodation that's just going to fix it, we're missing a piece of it.
And I got to be honest, in my experience, it often doesn't quote unquote fix it.
Right.
So, anecdotally, I have had students who, even though we have not necessarily approved them for, extended deadlines, have just self-advocated, talked to the professor, gotten an extra day or two. But the procrastination piece is still there. And then they sometimes blow the extended deadline. And now they're embarrassed because, then they don't go to class, even though it's an electronic submission. It's not like the old days where I had to physically go to class and hand a paper in, because I'm a dinosaur. And so, then their anxiety goes up. Or, even if they get the extension, then they still have that paper to do. I have seen well-meaning professors say, get it to me anytime. And that is actually the kiss of death for this stuff.
Yeah.
Because then the student doesn't have any sense of urgency. And the professor thinks they're doing them a favor. And the student's anxiety ramps up. And of course, the ship is still sailing. Everything's going forward. So now you have that paper to do. The next paper is coming. And it all starts to feel very unmanageable. Again, I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but I have seen this stuff anecdotally in my time. And so if we're talking about how to perhaps not have your students in this situation, the more we can do in high school to get them meeting the expectations. And I know, we're talking about neurodiversity. They're not all the same. Somebody just emailed me to ask about alternatives to taking tests. And we're not at that point yet as a field where I see a lot of that happening. And so I think there are great opportunities, and I encourage students always to ask for whatever they want, because even if Disability Services doesn't say yes, an individual professor might say, sure, I will do that with you. There's the self-advocacy piece, right? What you don't know until you ask. But I want them to go feeling secure that they know what the environment looks like and that they have had some practice with all of those skills.
As we kind of wrap up our conversation, I have one last question for you. And this might be a little bit difficult to answer, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Mm-hmm.
How can parents handle the emotions and the fears that their kids might fail?
Yeah.
What advice do you have for them? What words of wisdom do you have as they kind of like watch their kids leave the nest and they can't protect them?
They can't. I mean, I think they can always be an emotional support to their students. That's a great question. Again, I'm a parent too. I am empathetic, and I know that parents of students, and I think I talked about this in I forget what step. I understand that for some parents, they have, especially if their student has been identified later in their education, watch the student struggle and sometimes have failures first before somebody looked and said, oh my gosh. But one of my colleagues said in a conversation with me, maybe for the last book, maybe it was this one, something to the effect of like, look, colleges, even with the accommodations, even if if you can find academic coaching, executive functioning coaching, college is still going to be hard. And our students with disabilities, and that is the term I use. And I don't think of it as something anybody should, as a negative word, and be mindful that at the college level, that's what we serve. We serve students with disabilities. That students with disabilities are probably going to have to take longer to get their work done and perhaps put more effort in than their neurotypical peers, because they're choosing to go into an academic setting where that's what we're doing. So to go back to your question, I think that, some conversations can be had before they leave about, and during this whole process, why are you interested in college? What would you like to do? Nobody at 18 should be expected to know what they want to do for the rest of their life. But, cautiously optimistic, like, we believe in you. Here's where all the help is. You can help them look up where the sources of support are. But, things are going to be hard. And if they are really struggling and if they haven't gone for help, that's the first thing to ask them about. Make sure that they have asked for their accommodations, because research shows they haven't always. And ask them if they, gone back to see what else is available to them. But, for a lot of them, college will be challenging and they won't be able to make it. If they are failing, then it's time to do some triage on what is happening and figure it out. Are they in a place that's too hard for them? Are they just not ready yet? We now know so much more about the brain. We know that they're not done developing. Is time off, time to take, live at home, take some courses at a community college to get accustomed to the demands, without also, the overwhelm of living in an environment. There was just a great piece I saw yesterday from a student with autism about how his first semester, he had to leave. He was so overwhelmed with the social stuff as well. And he was able to go back and be successful. It's a great story. But I would say if you're starting to get qualms in your students' senior year about their readiness to go immediately to college, then I think you have to be honest with them and talk to them about it. And again, that's where I think the backing off the supports to see, because how do they know what they can do if everybody's continuing to provide supports? But I think just always tell them that you love them, that you believe in them, that, college may be the right thing for them, but maybe it's not right now. And that there's a great quote in the book, Eric Enlick, I think, says something to the effect of, college is not a binary. It's not you go to college right after high school or you never go. There are lots of different ways to go to college and lots of different times to go to college. And any of those can be appropriate for you. But I think it's hard. It's hard to say you're not ready yet. It's hard on the students, and it's often hard on the parents. But the anecdotes that I have seen about students who weren't ready yet and had a really rough experience, I think it's better to be honest with your kids and, maybe try an interim step.
Yeah. We'll set them up for success in the future.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Hamblet, author of 7 Steps for College Success, A Pathway for Students with Disabilities. Thank you for chatting with me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back. It's always fun to talk to you, Emily.
As parents, we have a vision for our child's future, often from before they're even born. It's hard to reconcile the fact that planning out their lives before we really know who they are is unfair. Every child's different, and every neurodivergent person has unique needs. We have to work to support them and leverage their strengths and build their struggles, and ultimately help them find the path that is the best fit for them, whether that means taking a gap year to gain a bit of maturity, or finding a college that has a program that can support their specific needs, or looking at options outside the traditional pathway to college. Just like I shared in last week's episode, there's no wrong path. It's all about helping our young adults find the path that's right for them. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
There's no one like you, my little girl. Your eyes so blue under those brown curls. Soon you're on your way, promise me that you know the world is yours. Strike them with your glow. Go on now, be good, be fine. Live your life, dream big, don't forget to be kind. Live, it's your life.
This episode has been sponsored by On Your Mark, a college success program for neurodivergent students at Marquette University. Call 414-288-0203 or just look for a link in the show notes. Our thanks to Elizabeth Hamblet. You can find information about her and her newly revised book, 7 Steps for College Success, in the show notes and on the episode page at neurodiversitypodcast.com. Oh, you can also find swag there, and past episodes, and information about our host and where she'll be next, and a contact page where you can submit your guest suggestions. Lots of stuff on our website. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. Our office manager and production assistant is Krista Brown. I'm the executive producer, Dave Morris, and for everyone here, thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.
Live, it's your life. Go on now. chase your dreams. Every scene, go on now. Be good, be fine. Live your life. Live your life.
This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance.